without it, there must be higher love down in the heart and in the stars above. Without it, life is wasted time. Look inside your heart, oh, look inside of mine. Things look so bad everywhere in this old world. What's fair? We walk blind and we try to see.
We're going to get all the way to the chorus.
Falling behind in what could be. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a...
Yes, I heard it out there. And that's our prayer, that's our hope, that's what led us into this conversation. We're in this letter called Philippians that I'll tell you more about in a moment. And I don't know why, instead of like pulling up Steve Winwood's Bop and we could all be up, I've got these like heavy emotional covers playing, but that's just what we're doing right now. Steve will make will show up at some point. But Higher Love is really just a conversation about how does this book of Philippians, one of the letters recorded in the inspired Bible that's given to us to wrestle with thousands of years later, like what does this mean for you and me, for our lives, for what we hope for and dream for how we live and move and breathe. And so welcome into the conversation into week 4. The letter, because it's written to a church, is like distinctly and intensely religious in nature. It's written to a group of people following Jesus. But there's wisdom in it for all of us. And I hope you've seen that. If you've been around through the conversation since week 1, you've seen the picture of how this can apply. And even if you're able to take something from Paul's letter and apply it to your marriage or your singleness or your hopes, your dreams, parenting, your business, that excites me. But my bottom line, and even more, is that you would discover Jesus in a new way. And you take that into all those things. So we're going to jump in. It's like showing up at like the 4th episode of a TV show. So if you haven't been here, you'd be like, wait, who did what? And who's this person and why are they there? So one thing, you kind of got to go back, and I hope you will, go back to our YouTube and just check out the previous weeks and kind of see what the story was. But I'll give you a quick summary. Week 1, we learned all about from the book of Acts, where the surgeon Luke records the history of the early church. It's called Acts, A-C-T-S. And Luke tells a story about Paul showing up in Philippi. Paul's this follower of Jesus. His whole purpose in life is to tell people about Jesus. He shows up in Philippi and he meets this woman named Lydia. She's a successful business owner. She doesn't have a lot of voice, though, or a lot of influence, a lot of power, but she has influence, and she's got questions about Jesus. And Paul says that's okay. Jesus can't wait to hear your questions. And she believes that day. Well, some things go wrong and Paul ends up being thrown in jail. And the next person to become part of the church in Philippi is the guy who puts him in jail. That's the start of this church. Those are the backstory. Those are the people, the beginning of who Paul's writing to. Kind of a mixed bag of people who really wouldn't be in the room together. That was week 1. Week 2, he jumps in. And he says, you can hear his warmth. I thank my God in all my remembrances of you. So he's just excited to write to this church and to these people. Now, he's writing from prison, and he is at a place where he's about to die. He's suffering for his beliefs. He's been beaten to the point near death. He's been hungry. He's been shipwrecked, and he's been imprisoned for years now. And he says these lines, I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion in the day of Jesus Christ. In week 2, we just said, look, you are all longing for a cause and a community, for a people and a purpose. It's built in us. We do it with our lives. We look for these things. And Jesus offers us, and Paul says, I found the ultimate cause. I found the ultimate community where these longings are best expressed. And then week 3, these iconic words from Paul. He's facing death, and he says, for me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. If I go on living in this body, that means I get to keep loving you. But what should I choose? I don't know. And I ended last week and said, Paul lives like someone who has the world in checkmate. It's like no move the world can make to throw him off. Kill him? Great. Die? Great. Live? Great. Prison? Great. Travel the world and tell people about Jesus? Great. Paul is at this place. He answers the question as to why you and I are here, to know God and to love God. and to make him known by loving other people. And so that brings us into week 4. I'm going to been reading it like a letter, right out of these little booklets of Philippians that we have. You can grab one. They're in the lobby if you haven't. Just kind of a great way to jump in. But we're going to be in verses 27. There weren't verses in the early letter. It was just a letter. But because we love math or something, we had to put numbers in here. So that was just a dig at math people. Okay. Philippians chapter 1, verse 27. So all those things happen, and then he says this, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or I'm absent, I may hear of you that you're standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation. I can't wait to dig into that one a little bit for you. But of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. And then Paul's going to go and he's going to talk about Jesus in this beautiful, dramatic way, and we'll get to that as we close. So keep in mind, they get this letter, they're all hanging out in a living room. And whatever architecture they had in their houses, but they're together. Maybe they're out by a river. I don't know. They're together though, and they get this letter and they open it up and someone reads it. And then Paul said this. The whole first part of the letter has been Paul talking about his updates, just like you would tell someone, hey, here's what's going on with Aunt Sally. Then he turns though and he goes, now I want to talk to you about you, what I've been hearing, what I hope for, what I see. And our focus in this text is going to be on unity. Let me pray for us. God, I pray that this text, these scriptures, your inspired word, would move in our hearts, would help us see a bigger picture, find a higher love. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay, I've got to go a different direction here. In 1990, my life was forever changed. Forever. Well, for 3 years it was changed. What happened was I watched Charlie Sheen in Navy SEALs about SEAL Team 6. Have you seen the movie? Seen them? Right. Prior to, good, right? I mean, I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to be a Navy SEAL. You know why I decided I need to be a Navy SEAL? Oh, spoiler alert, I'm not, nor was I ever. But here's why. Charlie Sheen, this is not the Charlie Sheen some of you younger people know. This is like action star Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen is just this like bad boy Navy SEAL who breaks all the rules and stops all the bad guys. And one day they're driving across a bridge in America and his commander's like, I'm giving it all up for like the more stable life. And Charlie gets up in the back of a Jeep on a bridge and he goes, you go ahead and die while you're living. He says something like that. And then he goes, woo, drops a few choice words, flies off the Jeep and lands in a river. At that moment, I'm like, that's the life I want to live. Jumping off Jeeps on bridges into a river, yelling things at people. So I decided I was going to be a Navy SEAL. I can't really decide that. It was going to be a path I was going to take. Naval Academy, that never happened. Buds, I still can't do a pull-up. All right, so the whole deck is stacked against me. But in the midst of all of this, though, so although I never became a Navy SEAL, I'd maybe known one Navy SEAL. I had a guy in my church who knew a lot of Navy SEALs. So that's kind of how these two come together. And what he would do is when they would be done with their service and head into civilian life, he knew that there were these leaders with incredible life experience and very, intense environments, and he would want to help them parlay or translate that experience into a post-service career, a civilian life career. And he was really good at it. He would coach them in taking their considerable leadership and experience and passing it on to other people who weren't Navy SEALs. And one day, so that's about as close as I ever came to being a Navy SEAL, was the day he walked up to me and handed me a book. So you have two non-Navy SEALs handing each other a book. That's the extent of my service. And he says, Carlos, you need to read this. He goes, more than any other book, more than anything else, when I coach these hardened, like highly skilled warriors, this is the book they say, you got to read this. And it's called The Warrior Mindset. It's a very fascinating book. I'd recommend it as a read. If you like to read structure, organization, character books, it's a really interesting read. And the warrior mindset kind of sets out and explains and brings to bearing the idea of how the Spartans were so successful and how their mindset can translate into like modern warfare or into contemporary soldiers or into contemporary life. The warrior mindset introduces the Spartan ethos of living. Now, the Spartans had two things that were really specific to their way of life. They were focused and they were united. Now, there's a lot about Spartan living you and I shouldn't mimic or follow or try to be like, but their focus and their unity was good. I mean, our 5-year-olds are in kid mission right now, being loved and given snacks. Their 5-year-olds are being trained in how to fight and kill. So totally different world for us, okay? But focus and unity was all the way through. And here's what fascinated me and why I stuck with this. And I was reading it, and they're talking about how the Spartans introduced a way of being together that changed warfare. So they had these large shields that half the shield could cover their body and half could cover the body of the man next to them. And they would lock these shields together. And where warfare was primarily about how good you were at hand-to-hand combat, they changed it into how focused and how united you could be as a group of people. And they would lock their shields left to right, front to back, and they would become, as a collection, one moving force, almost like a battering ram. It was so intense that, well, this isn't an actual picture, this is a Lego remake, but the most iconic battle was where 7,000 Spartans faced 150 to 300,000 Phoenicians. The Battle of Thermopylae, popularized by this movie right here, 300. But the idea was that a small, focused group of people who were united could do incredible things, could stand up against incredible odds. And so actually, these 7,000 soldiers, although they ultimately lost because they got sold out by someone and they got surrounded, they were able to defend this pass against a force of 150,000 to 300,000. Now, today we're going to learn how to fight like a Spartan. No, that's not true at all. Today we're going to talk about how the church and the existence of the church and what you and I might be invited into, how it plays into this unity and this focus. You know, the early church, the early followers of Jesus, someone said this about them. They said, these people are turning the world upside down. Their focus and their unity is so intense, it's bringing something new to the world. They didn't have education, they didn't have power, they didn't have superior training, they didn't have political influence, but they had something the world had never seen. It was this hope of Christ. And they took this hope, and together, through focus and unity, they were turning the world upside down, because whenever you get a group of people with focus and with unity, they're capable of doing incredible things, both incredibly amazing things and incredibly destructive things. One or the other. And this is what Paul is all about. So this brings us into our Philippians letter. He is captivated by Jesus. I mean, his whole energy, life focus, what he spends his time and his passion on, what he's willing to die for, is the cause of Jesus Christ. It has wrecked his life and changed his life and transformed his life and purpose, so much so that he says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And it's what the Philippians, Lydia, the jailer, and everyone else who came to follow, it's also what they're focused on. They're focused on turning the world upside down. And they've got this unity. And Paul's like, you know who we are. We used to be broken. We used to strive. We used to hurt. We used to compete against. We used to want other people to fail. We used to try to build up our lives and show that we were somehow morally good enough. And then that's all changed. And now Jesus is enough. We were lost, broken, conflicted. Conflicted with God, conflicted within ourselves, conflicted with you and me, conflicted with this world around us, and Jesus has come and he's put an end to that conflict. He has saved us. He has loved us. We're part of this together. We're lockstep focused. Paul, that's who he's talking to. That's going to be the story he tells today, because he believes what they have found is better. They found the ultimate community, the ultimate cause, one that you and I are all invited into. So focus, but unity needs work. We can get excited about focus. We're not so great at unity, and that was the issue in this first church. When Paul turns to the Philippians, the very first thing he says after giving an update on his life is it's basically just a pitch on, hey friends, you've got to be united. You've got to be united. And I mean, we all know sometimes people don't get along, right? And if you don't know that, that's because you're the one person they don't get along with. If we all know people don't get, and guess what? Christians don't get along too. If you haven't seen that, just look around a little bit. You'll see it's a real thing. It can be true in the church. It can be true in your life group. It can be true when you're serving together in a community. It can also be true outside of the church. It would have nothing to do with Jesus. In your neighborhood associations or the clubs, your quilting club or your climbing club or your shooting club or whatever it is you do. Like in those spaces, it can be true. It can be true at your workplace, amongst your employees, amongst the people you hire, amongst the management. Sometimes unity is just not easy because we're people. And it's like you're having a dinner party, your friends are coming over, and that one really outgoing friend is like, hey, we're bringing so-and-so. And you're on the phone, you're like, actually on the phone, you're probably like, oh, they're bringing so-and-so. Well, just say it's okay. That's great. Should we pretend we're sick? Like the whole conversation goes on, right? Then you have the party, then they come and you're like, hey, so I heard you're moving. People, unity is so complicated. It works like this for me. Happens all the time. You call me or someone calls me, except my wife, and I go, oh, I have no time to talk to them. But then I have to go, are they watching? Before I send them to voicemail, because if they're watching and I send them to voicemail, I look like the biggest jerk. None of you ever do this, right? But so then they're watching and then no one's watching. I send them the voicemail and then they text me and they say, hey, you sent me to voicemail. I still need to figure out how to do that so they don't know I sent them. So if you know how to do that, will you please let me know? And I call this, my goal in this, and I think what Paul invites the Philippians into is what I want to call the Albertsons test. You ever seen someone at Albertsons, maybe someone from your church, and you're like, oh no. Like you both turn in the bread aisle and you real quick back out of the bread aisle and then you figure out how to get all of your groceries without seeing them again, okay? Maybe you don't do that, but there's enough of you that do, that we're all on the same page here, okay? So the Albertsons test is this, it's where unity hits the road and you can be like, oh my goodness, I can't stand you, but I love seeing you because I know I need you. Because I know I can't be the full best version of me. I can't live the life the way I need to without you in it. And so our differences and our complications and everything comes together in the aisle at Albertsons. And Paul's basically going to say to this church, hey, Philippians, you got to crush the Albertsons test. Every time you see each other, bread aisle, boom, hit in the middle, you give a hug, you say, how are you doing? You look them in the eye and you say, I'm better because of you. That's going to be his invitation. But first, I've got a question for you. So what are you most focused on right now? Best way to answer this is ask the person sitting next to you. What am I most focused on right now? Give an honest answer. Or who do you have unity with? Maybe it's your sports team. Maybe it's your work group. Maybe it's your family. I don't know. Maybe it's a group of people on a Reddit forum. I don't know. Who do you have unity with? Answer these two or start, and we'll come back and we're going to see how Paul talks about it. And I've got to warn you up front. Paul hits hard and he's really intense. He cares so deeply about this church and their unity that he goes right into some big picture stuff. So we'll be back in 1 minute. All right, so focus and unity. I checked with D. Smith, because he's with the junior high right now. He said his focus is deadlift and his unity is gym bros. So if you're wondering where D's focusing his energy right now, that's right where it is, his focus and his unity. So Paul jumps in. He gets right to it. This is how the letter starts. Verse 27 as he continues. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. So that whether I come and see you or I'm absent, I may hear of you, that you're standing firm. This is what he wants to hear, that you're standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. Now keep in mind, he's writing to a distinct group of people. They all have a common belief set. In the church in this day, it would be uncommon for someone with questions or someone who's curious to come and sit in because the cost was so high. You had to give up so much to be part of this family. And so he's writing to them, and he kicks right off and he says, only let your manner of life be worthy. And I love the language and how it works out for us. Only, like we might use only and casually, but we mean something deeper by it. Like this would be like as a parent, if you got Saturday chores for your kid and you're like, only finish your chores before you do anything. You mean you can't do anything until you vacuum, weed, whatever else you do, get that all. The only. You have to finish this. This would be like an assignment at work. Like if you want to keep your job, only finish this presentation, only complete this project, only take care of this. It's a word that carries the full force of this. There's one most important, simplest thing I need you all to keep track of. So he kicks off with that. He brings it right in. He's like, what I'm about to say is so important. And then he drops all sorts of word pictures. He says, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. So there's this disunity. There was actually, in this case, there were two women in the church of Philippi that had started to have conflict, and that conflict was seeping into the whole church, and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do about it, and people were taking sides. So he jumps, he's like, look, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. This one simple thing. And that phrase, your manner of life be worthy, is actually only one word, politeuomai. It's one single word that means act like you're a citizen of this city. So it was actually only used civically before Paul brilliantly deployed it here. And he's basically saying, behave as a citizen. Like if you belong to Jesus, you're part of something. Behave like it. People should watch and they should know and they're part of that city that Jesus is building. They don't have to like it, but they can observe it, they can see it. So your manner of life be worthy, behave as a citizen. And what's so fascinating about this is week one I shared with you about this unique situation Philippi was in. Mark Antony and Octavian, two senators, had gone to war with Cassius and Brutus, the two guys who had led the assassination of Caesar. And that war fought its culminating battle outside of Philippi. And as a reward to the soldiers who worked so hard, Mark Antony and Octavian gave those soldiers the city of Philippi to be a Roman colony. And here's what was really cool about it. Roman colony was kind of like bragging rights. Not everyone got to be one. So when you're a Roman colony and you thought of this word right here, the idea of behave like a citizen, it was something you kind of walk tall. You were part of Philippi. You weren't from Ephesus or Thessalonica, or Athens, even as cool and cosmopolitan as it was. You're from Philippi. Behave like it. And Paul, though, is saying, don't behave like a Roman who gets protection of the laws and doesn't have to pay taxes, all the benefits of being a Roman colony. He's like, but behave like something even more important, a follower of Jesus. This idea of like belonging to a group, it's pretty built into our lives. Like if you're a cowboy, do we have any cowboys in here? No? We're in Idaho. Okay, well, I almost was a cowboy once. My wife and I went to a rodeo in Jackson Hole, first rodeo ever, blew my mind. I thought, where has this been my whole life? Excuse me, and at that rodeo, they said, hey, parents, send your kids down here. We have a fun game for them. It was a steer chase or a calf chase. Didn't know that's what it was. Had my little 2-year-old in shorts and flip-flops out in the middle of the rodeo, 150-pound animals chasing him around. We're like, are we bad parents? We didn't know what was going on. But we walked away and we're like, we're rodeo people. I started looking for cowboy clothing. I wanted a belt buckle for my birthday. Emily got me tickets to the Grand National Rodeo at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. It is not as Grand National as you think it is, but we were there for my birthday. When you're a cowboy, like if you're a cowboy, this is how I think it works. If I'm like, yeah, I'm a cowboy, and you're like, so am I. I got like 30 sheep and a couple head of cattle. on the like, I don't know. Okay, we have some cowboys in the church. Jason Friend, if you haven't met him and his son Hudson, they went skiing. If you're a cowboy, you act like it. Check it. Chaps. Jason's not here today for me to have fun with this, but he's got full-on chaps. If you're a cowboy, cowboys act like a certain thing. I really don't know. I never was one because the Grand National Rodeo ruined it for me. But maybe you're a football player. Anyone play football in here? Ever? This is such an interesting church. Like, what are you, like soccer and scientists? All right? Like, yeah, some of you play football. I know you did, James. And when you talk to someone like, you a football player? Yeah, I played football, like junior high. I was like a lineman, and you just carry it with you your whole life and your posture changes. Football players, they're always like flexing their traps. They're always bowing their neck back a little bit to look a little bigger, a little tougher. Doesn't matter when you played. Football players have a bit of a like, yeah, I'm a football player. It's kind of what I do. Band members are very different. Not like trombone band members, like rock band. You meet someone in a rock band, they're never like, yeah, I'm in a rock band, you should come out. They're always like, yeah, we play a little bit, sometimes kind of chill, right? That's like band members. Every group of people, they have their thing they act like. And Paul says, hey, you know Jesus. This one thing, I'm going to need you to act like you know Jesus because it needs to matter to not only you, but to the world. And it introduces us to this idea that the focus of a higher love is to embody the qualities of Jesus. That's this lifelong work. That's why we're here. That's what we hope for you. We want to inspire you to follow Jesus and deepen your faith and relationship with him because there's something about Jesus' life and way of loving and way of teaching and way of interacting with the world and way of ultimately saving that's irresistible. And we want to invite ourselves into that to embody the qualities of Jesus. And he goes on then, and he's going to talk about unity. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. We just talked about that. So whether I come and see you or I'm absent, I may hear that you are, and he uses these two conflicting metaphors, standing firm in one spirit with one mind and striving side by side. So in one sentence, Paul says so much. He begins with standing firm, and when he talks about standing firm, he uses military imagery back to that, like as soldiers who have trained together, who have a purpose together, who have a common cause. Stay focused and don't let the person next to you, don't let them alone. Don't bear their back. Always like, my sword is for my enemy, but my shield is for my brother. That's the kind of thing that would be said in military at that time. Like, I will never let you down. And Paul's noticing that the church is starting to break apart a little bit, starting to have some disunity. And so he brings in this, although he was not advocating for warfare, he was advocating for the intensity of a commitment like you would see as soldiers were together. And I think what he's hitting at and what I've experienced is that isolation, in faith and out of faith, like isolation is a destructive force. Loneliness, isolation, it destroys, it tears apart. It just propagates and speaks to and populates lies about who we are and what our value and what our worth is, who we belong to. Do we have meaning and purpose? Does anyone care that we're here? Why does my life matter? Isolation does this. And Paul's like, no. You know who's not isolated? Soldiers. They always have each other. They stand together regardless of their differences, regardless of the fight. The argument that was happening in this church was real. It wasn't like a petty thing about the color of the drapes or something like that. It was real. It was deeply felt and it was human. And Paul's like, you're going to push through that because Jesus is bigger. It's bigger. In my life, I've thought about isolation. I've had this gift for 20 years, and it's these three guys right here. That's younger us. We started meeting together almost 2 decades ago. And we meet twice a year. And we get together, and they're all pastors, different churches. A few other guys have been added to this. And we do this really weird thing. We look at each other and we say, is your life consistent? Are you taking anything, using anything, breaking anything, telling any lies? Are you doing anything that would affect your kids or your wife or the people in the church you've been called to serve? And how's the consistency of your life? Now, we also drink some beer and have a really good time together. But that's the framework of it. Right here, we say no to isolation over and over and over. And it was fascinating. One year, we're all sitting on the porch and having a beer, looking at the Pacific Ocean, and And one of the guys, there's this group of women that go by, and he's like, I think they want to party with us. That's not good. And we're like, dude, get over yourself. Okay? Like, I don't know what you're thinking about. So that's what he said. So then we go in, we're just sitting, chatting, we're having these conversations. About 10 at night, knock on the door. Hey, you guys looking for someone to party with? And my friend Ben goes, it's a dude party, and closes the door. Now, you just think about this scenario in this situation real quick. Isolation can be destructive. We call each other priority boarding. You get to get on first. First phone call, always pick up when it happens. This is just a picture for me, and it has nothing to do with church. See, we all need this in our lives. It has nothing to do with being a pastor. We all need these people that we can come to. And when that moment comes and the door opens and it's like, you guys looking to party, you can be like, no, sorry, it's a dude party. Like, it just is what it is. We've got each other's backs. We stand together. That's the imagery Paul uses. He's like, don't be alone. Don't be alone. I count on these guys. They count on me. It's how we're supposed to live. We have this in our life groups. We have this as I've watched our life groups deal with tragedy, deal with struggle, deal with hope, deal with belief and doubt. It all comes together. It's like, I'm not going to go alone. I'm going to stand firm. And Paul goes on and says, with one mind striving. And he switches from military to the word that's one mind striving is a phrase that means athletics. It's where we get the contemporary word athlete from. And he goes, this is athletic imagery. So he shifts from military to common sport, competition, people working together for a common cause with one mind striving. And he's doubling down on how important it is for you and me. And I want to say especially, I want to talk to you, those of you that are followers of Jesus particularly right now. This is your work to do. You don't get to choose disunity. You don't get to say, I don't like that person, I don't like their ideas, I don't like what they posted, I don't like who they voted for. You don't get to say that. Or Paul writes you a letter called Philippians and says, do better. Follow Jesus, have the mind of Jesus. And so he invites us into this. But you know what's great? Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's what you should expect when you look at those who say they're Christians. But this is still good for you. Don't be alone. Don't do it alone. Don't be alone. So I want to throw something up for you to think about. It's kind of a summary of history, but Paul identified what this early church, or historians have identified what early Christians practiced. 5 things. I've shared it here before. I think it's worth bringing up again because it wasn't just some idea like they sang some songs together. They actually had gritty things they grabbed hold of. And there were 5 things that marked and have marked throughout history a healthy church. Actions that came out of beliefs. The first was they were multiracial and multi-ethnic. Now, contemporary, it means they looked like their city. So the early church was not divided along any ethnic or racial divisions. All were welcome, and it reflected the city. I would hope we all agree with this. Highly committed to caring for the poor and the marginalized. Highly committed to caring for the poor and the marginalized. It was a mark of what it meant to be unified around Jesus. These are also, this is a bit arguable, but these are also 2 ideas that are really popular in liberal policy. I'm going to keep going because we see these in our politics. Then the third one, non-retaliatory, marked by commitment to forgiveness. This doesn't show up anywhere in politics. It doesn't really show up anywhere. But it's the invitation of Jesus to you and I. But there were 2 other things, strongly and practically against abortion and infanticide. This is what the early church believed, that all life was of value. And infanticide was a regular practice. If a child wasn't of use to you, you just left that child out and let nature take care of it. And the early church said there's no such thing as a human being that's not useful. They all carry the image of God. And so early adoption and foster care was born in the life of the church, strongly and practically. And then that began to translate to elder care as years went along. And then revolutionary regarding their ethics of sex. And I want to get into what this means in just a minute. There were these 5 qualities. These 2 at times could be considered more of a conservative political agenda. So no one really got the whole claim to all 5. They find themselves in the different ideologies that you and I grab hold of. And the early church had 5, these 5 were all living together. But this was the glue that held it together. We learn how to forgive. Just as Jesus forgave us, we learn how to forgive. And I want to say, they didn't sit down and make a list of what their platform was going to be. They took their lives and they said, Jesus, you get it all. You get my ethnic associations and my religious and my racial feelings. You get those because you made all people in your image. You get my resources and my what I think gives value to life and my idea about what makes someone worth love. You get that. You get the grudges and the hurt and the pain and the things that happen I want to hold on to. You get everything all the way down to, you get my sensuality. You get my body. Like, they weren't messing around every aspect of the human experience. So this wasn't the code they wrote. This was just them saying, what does it look like for Jesus to be the best thing in every area of your life? And then they tried to practice it. So when Paul wrote this letter to the church in Philippi, this is what they would have been about. And it would have been very different than the world around them. It would have been very different. They were category defying, both, I think, offensive and attractive in many ways. Like, what do we mean by this? What we mean is Jesus was and is trustworthy with every aspect of your human experience, with what you're going to do with your money, with what you're going to do with your education, what you're going to do with your sports and your hobbies, your relationships, what you're going to do with your body, what you're going to do with your desire to be together and not be alone. It's all there. Jesus says, invite me in and let me walk this road from you. That's the early church. And then they continue on. And Paul turns the corner and says, and don't be frightened of anything and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation and that from God. This is Philippians 1:28. So Paul jumps into unity. Be unified. This one thing, have the mind of Jesus. Wholly commit yourself to Jesus. Excuse me. Stand like a soldier, compete like an athlete, do it all. And he goes, don't be frightened in anything. It's imagery that's like a horse that gets scared and backs away. He's like, don't be like a horse that's like frightened and backs away. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. I want to camp right here real quick and just say what this is and isn't saying from my perspective, some of the study I've done and looked at. This is not like a binary category. Some of you are great and you're going to go forever, and some of you are going to be destroyed. And Paul moves on. He's talking practically about life. He's saying, look, you have become a follower of Jesus, and because of that, you are paying the consequence in your world. Some people are uninterested. Some of you might be uninterested in the claims of Christianity and what it means for your life. You think at the best it's a fairy tale, at the worst it's a blight on human history. That is a common conclusion people draw about the Christian faith. And Paul's like, don't back away. Instead, bring peace. The persecution, the opposition, the way you feel confronted, it's okay. It's actually a sign that you belong to God, that you found how to align your life with the way of Jesus. Following him will make your life better and make you better at life. Paul's like, you get it. And he goes, but there's others, the people who persecute you, they don't get that they're living in destruction. They have the same brokenness you do, but they're trying to solve it a different way. They're trying to solve it a different way. This is for those of you who've been around the Bible a while, it's a misread to read this as like a heaven-hell statement. This is a practical life statement. Destruction's a real thing, and you and I are fighting it all the time, trying not to destroy more. And Paul's like, the fact that they stand against Jesus, it's clear that they're still fighting with God, fighting with themselves, fighting with you, and fighting with this world. And Paul's heart and desire is that everybody would stop that fighting. And he goes on to say it's a gift from God. For it's been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him but also suffer for his sake. Engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had and now hear that I still have. And Paul gives two promises. The first is the gift of belief. He said, guess what? Jesus gives you the gift of belief. This is specifically addressed to people who are followers of Jesus. It's not addressed to people who are just suffering. It's talking about like suffering actually. Like right now in the world, there are people suffering, losing their lives for their belief in Jesus. So it would make a little more sense in that environment. He goes, but you get the gift of belief and you get the gift of suffering. Because it's one thing to accept suffering and resign yourself to it, like, okay, I'm going to suffer. It's another to realize the privileges that come with it. And the invitation there was Jesus suffered. He's a suffering God, unlike any other belief system, that Jesus would be a suffering God who knows what you and I would go through. That's the invitation. So Paul says, Jesus promises you belief, but he also promises you suffering. And if you celebrate in your belief, you also have to celebrate in your suffering. You can't pick and choose the ones how you want to go about it. Now, if I'm the Philippians, I read this and I'm like, good old Paul, super heavy-handed, comes in hard with all these big ideas, great word pictures, but how am I supposed to do this? And so in chapter 2, and we're going to end with this, he turns the corner, he tells us how to do this. I'm just going to read it for you right here. He says, okay, everybody, what I just said was really hard to wrap your heads around. So they're all sitting by the river, wherever they're reading this letter. So I want you to understand why I can say this. It has everything to do with Jesus. So if there's any encouragement in Christ, if you have any comfort from his love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, this unity is going to look like something real. It's going to look like encouragement. When you show up at church and you're in a life group and you serve together, you should experience these things. I experience encouragement in Christ, comfort from his love, participation. I have purpose in the Spirit and affection and sympathy. Other words for that are tenderness and compassion. So Paul goes, that's the feel that you get. So complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Notice what he's doing. He's starting to stack now. He's like, okay, this sounds hard. I want to tell you, like it's almost impossible except for one way forward. Let each of you look not only at his own interests, but also to the interests of others. I hope you'll go back and read Philippians chapter 2. It's one of the most iconic passages in what's called the epistles, the letters to the churches, and contains what's considered to be maybe the oldest creed of Christianity, the first agreed upon thing everybody said. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. But he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. And so Paul makes two moves here. One is what we spent the bulk of the morning talking about. He's like, be unified, like a soldier, like an athlete. Be unified. Do the hard work of coming together. Let your mind focus around the qualities of Christ. And then they turn and say, the focus of a higher love is to embody the thoughts of Christ. So we need to embody the attributes and the qualities of Jesus, but to do the work of embodying the thoughts of Jesus as well, how he views you. It's way better than I view you. It's good. How he views me. Paul's like, think like Jesus did. Stop looking at people the way we've been taught to look at people. Look at them as something and someone beautiful and special, worth dignity and honor, made in the image of God. Embody the thoughts of Jesus. And he defends himself. You want to know why? Because just look what Jesus did. The distance, this is how I summarize it. The distance Jesus traveled from the form of God to death on the cross is inconceivably dramatic. Jesus covered an incredible distance to demonstrate for you and I and to bring to you and I life everlasting. An incredible distance demonstrated on the cross. But it began, he was actually the form of God. But he didn't consider that to be something to take hold of. But instead, he became obedient to death, even death on the cross. And these are Paul's closing words. I felt like the last part of this didn't need explaining. It's just right in our faces. Be like Jesus. It's the best thing you can do. So that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And that's where Paul puts his emphasis. He goes, this whole unity conversation I've had with you, come together, do the hard work, stand for something beautiful and good, put aside your differences, learn to walk together in unity. The whole thing is just a life that acknowledges that Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven and earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It's a lot to think about, and there's no way to make it more like swallowable. I would just encourage you to look at it for a minute before we sing our closing song and have a baptism. If you're the one you think Jesus is kneeling to, that system's going to get you exactly what it's set up to get you. And Paul's invitation is to invert it, to realize that your gifts, your passions, your hopes, your dreams, your talents, your parenting, your relationships, your loneliness and your togetherness, your sensuality, your success, all of these things are at their best when you bring them to Jesus and share how to best live out them. That's Paul's invitation. So I'd like you to do the work of just looking at these words on the screen for a minute, and then we're going to sing together and we're going to see one of our students take a step of baptism.